And I'll be absolutely frank. When we first won the '97 general election, the communication systems that we inherited in Whitehall, in my view, were not fit for purpose. They had to be brought into the modern media age.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit before our period. If we can just come back to the period.
It explains why I was doing the job that I did at the time that I did it, and how he understood that on something, not just on issues to do with foreign affairs and security, but on any of the major issues and high-profile issues, you have to have a communications element, if you like, embedded in those policy discussions.
Okay, so in this circle of people that you describe, you've talked of yourself, Jonathan Powell, Sally Morgan, Sir David Manning, John Scarlett, Sir Richard Dearlove, the head of SIS. Did the Prime Minister seek advice also frequently in the period we're talking about from Peter Mandelson?
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
Wasn't one of the people he'd ring up to throw questions at?
He may, from time to time, have spoken to Peter Mandelson, but I certainly wouldn't have said he was in that, what you call...
Would he have discussed questions about Iraq privately or informally with the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes. Quite a lot?
I would have thought so, yeah. I mean, it was... at the time, there were obviously this went over a long period of time, and there were periods during this whole... that you're looking into, where actually domestic policy was far more dominant within the public debate. But I would say certainly that Gordon Brown would have been one of the key ministers that he would have spoken to regularly, yeah.
So, as the policy developed 2001 to 2003, Gordon Brown would have been very much part of the private circle of consultation.
I would have said so, yeah.
Yeah.
And so would John Prescott.
So going back to the Prime Minister's working methods, would he from time to time assemble you, the close advisors we've talked about, as a group to, when he was wrestling with issues on Iraq, would he get you all together, or would he talk to you individually? Would it happen almost ad hoc? How did it work?
I think in terms of, if I can sort of take you through a week, as it were, I mean, the Prime Minister used to work phenomenally hard at weekends in terms of reading not just official papers, but reading history and all sorts of things. He would use the weekend to give himself time for, I suppose you'd call it, a bit deeper reflection. And I think he would also then be phoning people. Certainly, I used to would be phoned at the weekends, and I would know he was phoning other people as well. And he would be having lots of conversations. He'd be phoning John Prescott, Gordon Brown, Jonathan Powell, Charlie Faulkner, whoever it might be phoning lots of different people. He would phone people outside the circle. He would often, not necessarily about making decisions, his constituency agent, John Burton, was somebody he'd want to know what are they saying in Sedgefield. He'd want to know, he'd speak to MPs about what was happening in their patch. He would then, in terms of a specific discussion, most Mondays used to start with the Prime Minister having sent a note out to what you would call his inner circle, and that would be the basis for a meeting on Monday morning. And when we got onto meetings specifically to do with Iraq, from memory, the people who would almost certainly be at those would be Jack Straw, Jeff Hoon, Admiral Boyce, John Scarlett, sometimes Richard Dearlove, and myself, probably, Jonathan.
But that's a sort of formal meeting on Iraq.
But I think that's where most of the discussions would be. I mean, in terms of the sort of discussions I might have with the Prime Minister out with that, they would probably, certainly, usually in the morning, first thing, but that's just about getting the day in shape and working out whether they need to change the diary for this or that, and which phone calls is he making, when, and just sorting out the day.
And that wouldn't be a single topic discussion, would it?
No, not at all, no. And then in terms of, and through the day, it would be dealing with situations and issues as they arose.
Now, these informal discussions, phone calls and so on, other than the minutes you say the Prime Minister might well have delivered over the weekend that you discuss on a Monday morning, were they recorded or minuted in any other way?
Not routinely, I wouldn't say, no. My approach of this tended to be that if I felt there were things arising from those conversations that had then to be communicated to others who might be, because often it would be the Prime Minister phoning me to ask me to do something. could be anything, about talking to the media, talking to other politicians, talking to people that he just wanted me to talk to get his view across to them, whatever it might be. If it was, on the other hand, something where I was required to start work on a speech or start to work on an argument that we were developing, it might require me then to write around to other people to say the Prime Minister wants ABC.
And you do that by email, would you?
I would usually dictate that to the garden room.
Yeah.
If it was the weekend, and if it was during the week, I would dictate it to my PA.
Now, thinking of the outside advisors, can you recall anybody that the Prime Minister found particularly helpful as a sort of sounding board or a source of information on Iraq and the Middle East?
I can't. I'd have to go away and think about that. There's nobody comes immediately to mind. You'd probably be better asking Jonathan, but Jonathan would have been.
We'll pursue that further. So, just to sort of summarise this discussion about your role before we get into more detailed areas of the policy, to recapitulate, you were involved in a lot of the discussions about policy and strategy on Iraq as an advisor to the Prime Minister, as you told the Foreign Affairs Committee. That's correct? You, as you also told the Foreign Affairs Committee, and as you've just said, you attended a huge number of meetings with the Prime Minister on this subject. And then you played an interdepartmental coordinating role on policy communication. That's something you described to Lord Hutton's inquiry. And what you did, your title was strategy as well as communications. Your role was not restricted to communications. It effectively allowed you to range right across the board of government policy insofar as the Prime Minister wanted you to do so.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
All of that would be a fair summary.
Can I just make a point about the cross-departmental communications? Because I think this is important. When I talked about the systems that we inherited, it was very much silo-driven. It was department by department. It was very difficult to get, I found, to get departments on the communication side of things to work together. And my approach to this by the time we get to Iraq was very much driven by our experience in relation to Kosovo, where we did ultimately, I think quite successfully, put together, we internationalised our communications, but also we managed to get a sense of departments working together. So there was an understanding that Number 10, if you like, was leading on the strategy, but there was maximum openness with all the various departments, and then sharing of personnel and trying to bring people, if you like, onto the same page, literally in the same room, where you take an approach to communications that is not, here's this department, here's that department, they're all doing their own thing.
I'd like to talk now, and we'll come back later on to the questions of how the government worked and the cabinet worked, but just to one element that's very relevant, I think, to today's discussion, which is how closely did you work with the intelligence and security agencies?
How closely did I work?
Yes, you personally.
I'd say at times very closely. Most of my time working for the Prime Minister, I didn't have that much to do with intelligence agencies. I would say, in terms of an intense period of contact and consultation with the intelligence services, I would say probably post-September the 11th and during Iraq, during the Iraq crisis, they were the two high points, I suppose.
I mean, you told Lord Hutton that, and again I quote, I, over several years now, have worked very closely with the intelligence agencies, particularly during these conflict situations.
Yeah.
And you had access to highly classified intelligence papers, including JIC papers.
I did, although I was able to see them. I didn't routinely see intelligence reports, and I didn't go out looking for them either. But what I found was that the intelligence agencies, I suppose somewhat to my surprise, I felt kind of got this point that I made earlier about how communications was changing better than other parts of government.